Kway. Good afternoon. My name is Elder Lorraine Whitman, Grandmother White Sea Turtle, and I would like to acknowledge my traditional territory of MMIWG, home of the Mi'kmaq Ilnu people. I am also the president of Native Women Association of Canada, which means I represent and defend the rights of First Nations, Métis, and the Inuit women across Canada and internationally. We are reaching out to you today to commemorate the first anniversary of the day that the final report of the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women was delivered into the hands of the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. It is not an anniversary that we are marking with any great happiness. After the news last week that the federal government will not be releasing in June a promised national action plan to address the 231 calls for justice of the National Inquiry. Instead of a national action plan, we are left with a lack of action plan. But I do want to share some good news. Because while the government has not been able to find time over the past 12 months to conduct the consultation it says are necessary to draft an action plan, Canada's Indigenous women have been working hard to increase the safety of our communities and especially of our mothers, our daughters, our sisters, and our aunties. The sad fact is, we cannot afford to do nothing in the face of the violence that continues to take the lives of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit women. I cannot speak to all the efforts being made by Indigenous women across Canada to stop the killings and the disappearance and to force the authorities to bring the perpetrators to justice. But I can tell you a little about what NWAC has done since June 2019. We have come up with our own 10-point plan for addressing the calls for justice. We have held a roundtable, funded in part by Ottawa, to find out what grassroots Indigenous women think should be priorities moving forward. We have created webinars and used social media to distribute information to Indigenous women, healthcare providers, and others to help them understand how to keep our people healthy in a cultural, sensitive way. We have started commemorative campaigns and commissioned commemorative art. We have collaborated with universities and correctional institutions to create programs aimed at Indigenous women. We have spoken out repeatedly on the international stage. We have written legal papers defending the rights of Indigenous women. We have communicated often with the Canadian politicians to remind them that the issue of the missing and murdered women has not gone away. We are working on a major project to be announced shortly that will be aimed at healing those who have been damaged by this ongoing tragedy. This is what Indigenous women are doing for Indigenous women. So let's talk very briefly about the government's lack of action. NWAC has compiled a report card of the government's progress on the calls for justice, just as we had compiled report cards on the inquiry when it was doing its work. Rather than access each 231 calls, we looked at 4 broad pathways that the inquiry's commissioners said have helped to maintain the violence. This being health, culture, security, and the right to justice. Sadly, in none of those 4 areas had the government done enough to give it a score. It failed, period. But we will not give up. We plan to provide continuous report cards in the coming months and years to measure the progress of lack of progress that is being made. And we hope to have a better story to tell you in the months to come. Ottawa says a global pandemic prevented the kind of consultation required for an action plan. They had 9 months before the pandemic hit to reach out to us and other Indigenous groups. But I can tell you that NWAC did not hear much from them during that time. I can also tell you that the Indigenous women who attended our roundtable said there has been enough consultation, and the report of the National Inquiry and the 231 calls for justice already prescribe the road ahead, and that the time to act is now, not years from now, not even months from now. Saying the pandemic is standing in the way of a national action plan is a double slap in the face to our Indigenous women who are living in even greater fear of violence because of the isolation being brought by this disease. An internet survey completed recently for NWAC and verified by NANO's research suggests that 18% of Indigenous women and 25% of Two-Spirited have experienced violence in the past 3 months. These are things we have been trying to tell the government, but they have not been doing very good listening. In May, with this anniversary date drawing near, there has been no request for input from Minister Bennett's office regarding what should go into the National Action Plan. So, we wrote to the department and offered 8 measures of how our own that could form the base of such a document. First, we asked to keep the promise of releasing a national action plan in June. They have already failed to deliver on that. In addition, we asked that they establish a national task force of investigators to reopen unsolved files of missing and murdered women. We have asked that they establish a national database to record the details of the crimes committed against Indigenous women. We asked that they provide funding to establish a unit within NWAC to work on the issues related to the calls for justice and to monitor progress. We asked for financial help in launching a public awareness campaign aimed at eliminating racism and sexism. We asked the government to commit to bringing NWAC to the table whenever decisions are being made that impact the rights of Indigenous women, girls, and gender-diverse people. We asked that the government support a virtual international summit to examine the best practices being deployed by countries in the Americas to deal with COVID-19 and its impact on Indigenous women. And we asked for help in expanding the scope of that major healing project I mentioned earlier. You will see that we have also written an in-depth policy paper that demonstrates Canada's international legal obligations to make reparation for the harms done to Indigenous women and girls and for the violations of their human rights. Addressing the 231 calls for justice would start those reparations. Frankly, the minister's explanation that there has not been enough consultation to draft a first national action plan simply does not hold water. As she had said herself, the plan was always intended to be a living document. It was supposed to be the start of something that would be expanded and modified over the coming years to gradually weave safety blanket for Indigenous women. Instead of the start of something, we are left with nothing. Even so, we are not abandoning hope that the government will release a plan in the near future, and that our suggestions will not and will be taken seriously. We are willing to do whatever is necessary to help make that happen. We are not abandoning hope in the federal government. We hope that the federal government has not abandoned the Indigenous women of Canada. Walalan, merci beaucoup, and thank you for your time.